Hey y'all, my name is Mrs. Gaffney. I'll be doing your ecology notes for the unit. And these first notes are on energy transfer through ecosystems. So ecology, just to start, we've got a definition here. It's the study of the interactions between organisms and their environment. These are a few of your vocab words that are really important to know because if you get comfortable with these, as we're going through ecology, we're going to use these as if you know them. And a way I like to remember them, I think it's helpful to have the visual, is thinking of them as levels of organization. So levels of organization are something where you could start with, let's say, the molecular level and say I have an atom. And then if I put two atoms together, I have a molecule. If I put multiple molecules together, eventually I would get tissues in a human. If I put tissues together, I get organs, and so on and so forth. So levels of organization in ecology here, we would start with the individual. Got our nice friendly little grazer here. I believe that's an elk. If you put a few elks together, you have their population. So a population is, and these definitions are on the next couple slides, but basically individuals that work together, they live together, they're in contact with each other. So they would breed, they would fight, all those fun population things that they do. A community, now we're going to move outside beyond these elk and this elk population, and we're including everything that the elk interacts with. So you see, you've got the moose over here, we've got the cougar that might eat it, we've got these herbivores here, this little guy. So they're also in the environment that the population is in. Now, we're still all biotic factors here, meaning all living factors when we're in the community setting. It's just all of the organisms and living things that interact with each other in that area. And then we move on to the ecosystem. So the ecosystem is going to include now the abiotic factors as well, like water, rocks, anything that's considered not living. So now we're talking about the landscape that these things live in and their resources. So the ecosystem is one step up from that. And then biome, we'll get a definition of biome as well, but it's a step up from ecosystem. Basically a large area that has the same climate and you could say plants living in it. So precipitation, average precipitation is consistent through it. Average temperatures throughout the year, and then the types of life that it supports. So, for example, desert would be a biome. Tropical rainforest would be a biome. We live in the deciduous biome. Some of it was prairie before. And then a step up from that would be the biosphere, and that's the earth, the crust of the earth and everything that's on it. Okay, so here we have the definitions, and you can pause this video to write these down, but here you're getting another visual. So you've got the bison down here by its lonely self, just one individual living organism. Then you have a bison herd. So the herd has properties that the individual doesn't have. So if you think about a bison herd, the reason they're in a herd is then they can protect themselves, right? They can put their young in the middle if they're being attacked. So they're getting warmth if there's storms, like snowstorms. So these guys stay pretty warm through that. So the herd has properties that the individual doesn't have. And then again, we're going to the community. So now it's everything that the bison interacts with, all these organisms that it interacts with. So you got a snake here, could bite the bison, hopefully not. The bison's delicious. You've got ecosystem, so now we're adding in the stream, the rocks, the air. Those would all be abiotic factors. And biotic and abiotic is something you'll need to know as well. There will be a definition in later notes for that, but it would be important to have that definition in because we'll use that a lot too. And then I had to fit the biome in here because it wasn't in this nice graphic. It comes after ecosystem. Biomes are fun. Typically we do a biome pamphlet, but we won't get to that this year, unfortunately. So if you want to Google a little bit about biomes, I think they're interesting. You can pick your favorite place and see what biomes are there. And then again, the biosphere. So it's part of the earth that contains all of the ecosystems. In other words, everything on the crust of the earth. Okay, Habitat and niche. We've got our friendly little snake here. He says, I am the gardener snake. I live in most places you see today. I live in forests, fields, and marshes. Those places are my habitats. So that first row is talking about all the places that he or she inhabits. The niche is the job. So the job of a snake is to eat things like this frog that it looks like it's gonna choke on. Snakes are kind of amazing. And then, like the snake says, doesn't only, oops, oh boy, go back. Doesn't only eat frogs, they also eat small fish, mice, bird eggs. So its job is a predator, right? So it's feeding itself. Um, with the habitat and the niche, habitat is the address, niche is the job or the occupation. We're now going to transfer into talking about how energy flows through an ecosystem. So for an ecosystem to be self-sustaining, in other words, if you took the humans out of it, I mean, even with humans, but let's just say for simplicity's sake, we're taking humans out. For that ecosystem to keep going and not die off, we have to have some flow of energy. So we'll be talking about food chains, food webs, the difference between those, and trophic levels, so the different feeding levels on that food pyramid of where those animals fall and how that all has to be balanced. I love this slide because typically if kids are sleeping by this point in there, they see this creepy sun and it's like, huh, that's a little weird. So I usually really enjoy your reaction to seeing this sun. I think it's from the Teletubbies, but unfortunately I don't get to see it this time. So you can email me if you had a reaction. I'd appreciate it. But all energy in an ecosystem starts with what? The sun. So we have producers, which are using the sun's energy to make their food. We also call them autotrophs. So when we're talking about food chains and trophic pyramids, we're going to be using these different terms. So producers and autotrophs can be used interchangeably. And here I put a couple of native Minnesota plants. So we've got the Norway pine here, some pretty pine cones on that thing. Poison ivy, hopefully you know what that looks like. You should stay away from it. It also has white berries. Don't eat those. That would suck. And then our state flower up here, the lady slipper, the pink and white lady slipper. So those were all things that make their own food. And now we've got the consumers. So again, I've got some native Minnesota animals for you here that are all consumers. We can also call them heterotrophs, meaning they don't make their own food, they have to eat it. So primary consumers, they're the ones that are eating plants. So if we're looking at the pictures here, our nice white-tailed buck is going to be the one eating the plants. Secondary consumers, they eat the primary consumers. So our loons here could be secondary consumers. They're eating, you can see the little minnow in its mouth there. A little baby, so cute. And something to note here is that, you know, the loons don't have to just be a secondary consumer. Maybe they end up being a tertiary consumer, which is the ones that eat the secondary consumers. So there's some flexibility there with animals and in what you could call them. It all depends on where they fall in the food chain. Our wolf here is usually, I mean, well, if you think about it, if the wolf ate the deer, right? The deer is the primary consumer. The secondary consumer would then be the wolf. If the wolf ate the loon, I mean, the loon was the secondary consumer because it ate the fish. That was the primary consumer. So then the wolf becomes tertiary consumer. So really, these terms are based on where they fall in the food chain. So types of heterotrophs, remember a heterotroph is something that doesn't make its own food. We've got herbivores, you guys are familiar with most of these terms, you've heard them before. Herbivore, they're plant eaters. Carnivores are meat eaters, like this fox over here hunting in the snow. Omnivore, they're gonna eat both meat and plants, like our friendly black bear here. They're not actually friendly, don't try to take a selfie with them, please. And detrivores, so those are going to be eating the decomposing matter. They're very charming like that. Those are morel mushrooms, if you're not a mushroom hunter at all. Supposedly very delicious. I've never tried one, but they would be a detrivore. A little clarification on what a detrivore is. So a decomposer is a general term for something that breaks down dead organisms through decomposition. So generally, Worms, slugs, fungus, bacteria, they're all decomposers. Detrivore is a little more specific in that they're consuming the decaying. So vultures would be a detrivore, worms, slugs. So they're eating the big parts of the decaying. So actually, if we look back at this, oops, other one, the morel mushrooms here would be decomposers, but not necessarily detrivores. Okay, food chains. So food chain is just one single line of feeding relationships in an ecosystem. They always start with the sun, well, on land anyway. So the grass is taking in energy from the sun. Then the energy is passed to the deer because the deer is going to eat the grass. And then the energy from the deer is passed to the cougar because the cougar eats the deer. So you can see the arrows are pointing in the way that the energy flows. A food web is made up of many food chains put together. So it's showing energy transfer through the whole ecosystem, whereas the food chain is just showing that individual organism and where the energy went through other organisms. Now, we have two different food chains here. Which one is more stable? It says here more complex equals more stable. So we have all these different feeding paths over in the ocean here. So this would be the more stable of these two. And the reason for it being considered more stable is, let's say in our feeding paths in the ocean over here, if we have a crab eater seal go extinct, sad, very sad, but this whole food chain or food web is not going to collapse because the crab eater seal is gone. So we've got different fallback pathways for that ecosystem to still continue on. Whereas over in our food chain in the forest here, our food web, sorry, I keep doing that. In our food web in the forest, if the rabbit goes, we're going to have some problems. So it's more complex if it has more food chains in it, more stable. Here are some terms we're going to be talking about as well. Pyramid of numbers. So we're going to talk about how much energy is passed between what we call trophic levels or those different feeding levels. Pyramid of biomass. So I've got a definition of biomass for you coming up. And then pyramid of energy. So we're talking about percent energy lost at each level. Sorry, this pyramid of numbers is just literally the number of individuals. I had that mixed up. So the population versus energy over on the pyramid of energy. So an energy pyramid, we're looking at also calling it a trophic pyramid. We've got producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers. And if you look at how much energy is at each level, that's not an exact number, but on average, about 10% of the energy gets passed to each level from the previous one. So the rest of that energy, those animals and organisms are using for life. They're using it to grow. They're using it for respiration, taking in oxygen and releasing carbon dioxide. So they're using up the rest of it just to be alive. So the energy gets passed when organisms get eaten. So pause this, take a little practice and see if you can figure out how much energy then would be at the top of this pyramid. So we start with 10,000 joules of energy and only 10% gets passed to the next level. So pause it, try it out. Your answer should be 1 joule of energy by the time you get to the top. Okay, ecosystem energy flow. Here's that biomass definition I promised you. Biomass is the amount of living matter in a habitat, or in this case, the amount of, we talk about it in trophic levels. Okay, so that bottom trophic level, look at this left-hand side graph up here or model. There's a ton of biomass at the bottom of the pyramid. And if you think about it, if 10% is all that gets passed to the next level, it's really important to have a big base here, right? And realistically, if we were to look at those numbers, there's a lot more at the base and then less gets passed on later on, but we average that out to 10%. So the biomass has to support, this biomass at the bottom has to support the rest of the pyramid. Okay, Human impact on food webs. We're almost done, guys. Hang with me here. Human impact, biomagnification, and bioaccumulation are two really important vocab words that you will see on your end of the unit assessment. So biomagnification, think about that as it being magnified through the food web. So it's an increase in concentration of toxin as it passes through a food web. So the whole food web is involved in this one. Bioaccumulation is just the accumulation of toxins in an individual organism. So biomagnification is bigger than bioaccumulation. It's going through a wider, larger scope. So with bioaccumulation, if you ever look at a Tylenol bottle, an infant Tylenol bottle or toddler bottle, you can see it's based on weight for how much that kid should take in for medicine. And that's because you have to have enough of that medicine to get past the liver being able to detox it so that it actually works, but you can't have too much or the body can't process the rest of that out after it's done its job. So that would be an example of bioaccumulation. If you take too much and your body can't keep up with it. So here we look at this in terms of our food pyramid, right? So we've got all these toxins. This would be the top of this is the base of our pyramid. So, you know, like the oh my gosh, I'm blanking here. The consumers, right? The primary producers. There we go. This is the consumers. So if we have a lot of toxins being put into the environment, then they're getting eaten and passed on. So if we're talking about biomagnification, by the time that thing gets to the predators at the top, there's going to be quite a bit accumulated because it stores in the fats. An example of this would be DDT. So that was a pesticide that's now banned in the US, but they used it for mosquito and pest control. So you can see here, they're just spraying it right. They don't care if the little children are there. You know, they're just fogging that whole beach with that stuff. And what happened was biomagnification that accumulated in the ecosystem, and our predators, eagles, started having really thin eggshells. And so when they would sit on their eggs to incubate them, they would break. And so we almost lost eagles to DDT because we had bioaccumulation. It was accumulating within the organism, but then also if we're spraying this on everything else, I mean, mosquitoes have it. We also see biomagnification because they're getting it through their food web as well. So luckily we're past that. It also caused immune system problems, nervous system damage, and death in humans, so it wasn't ideal. We see this in aquatic environments as well with mercury. So you've probably heard about mercury content in fish. I know I have 2 kids, and being pregnant, you have to be careful about which type of fish you eat because mercury accumulation in certain types of fish is more than others. And so that's another example of seeing it in our world. What effect does trophic level have on biomagnification? What effect does lactation have on biomagnification? So these are just some things for you to think about as far as human impact on food webs. Lifespan, that's another big one. They're a shorter lifespan, but you eat a lot of them, you're going to accumulate a lot more. And then what does this mean for us? You have this website you can go to, it's called Seafood Watch. And they're looking at, you can see here, like, what can you do to have sustainable seafood? And that's a convoluted industry as well, because you would think it would be as easy as buying wild fish and not farmed fish. But sometimes, depending on the area and what the pollution control is there or how polluted those waters are, sometimes actually the farmed fish can be better for you than the wild fish. So this website is there to help you weed through that a little bit. So watch where your food comes from. And that's it for energy flow.